The How to Train Your Dragon live-action remake just got its first teaser trailer, and it's finally good. That's right, a movie you can take your stubborn old fart of a grandpa to now that it's not a dumb cartoon for stupid dumb babies. Only babies and idiots like something animated. Now this is real art. It's a real movie, because it's all real. Wow, a real non-animated, totally real dragon that isn't at all animated like the original. I can't believe it. Wow. Aside from the usual issues of it just looking like a lifeless shot-for-shot remake of the beloved animated classic, I mean, shot-for-shot doesn't do it justice. I don't know if this is even possible, but it looks like the exact animation files from the original were copy and pasted for the live action. Some of the shots and movements are that alike. Anyways, aside from the typical issues that come with live-action remakes, the strangest thing about How to Train Your Dragon is the director. Dean DeBlois. What has he worked on before? Oh, just a couple of other former DreamWorks projects here and there, some Disney projects as well. Most notably, he was a writer and director for the entire original How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. That's very unusual. John Musker and Rod Clements, for example, are a pair of veteran Disney animation filmmakers alongside DeBlois, having directed and or written several classics. The two of them have worked on The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, and most recently, Moana. But the live-action remakes for all of these films don't have Musker or Clements involved with them whatsoever. As far as I can tell, they're not even producers or executive producers. The live-action remakes have nothing to do with them. And this is a trend that you'll find with many live-action remakes of animated films, which makes How to Train Your Dragon so strange. DeBlois himself has worked on animated classics as well, like Lilo and Stitch, and even he's not involved with the Lilo and Stitch remake. According to an interview with DeBlois, it sounds like DreamWorks was going ahead with the live-action project anyways, and he wanted to be the one in charge. Honestly, I don't envy his position. If I had gone through the trouble of pouring my hard work into a trilogy of films, only for them to be subjected to the tired, disgusting trend of being chewed up and spat out in a live-action remake, well, I'd want to have control over that too, at least as much as I could. But this recent example just revolves into a widespread issue. There are just too many fucking remakes. Film remakes are becoming more and more popular, and it feels like it's all for the wrong reasons. There are exceptions to this rule, like Nosferatu, which is clearly being done out of love and respect for the source material, taken on by an artist that truly loves his work and has made 3 great and wholly original films already. It's not like Nosferatu is some beloved franchise that is just itching for a remake to make $1 billion and cash in on some form of nostalgia, unlike many of the biggest remakes being made today. Disney's absolutely the biggest culprit of this problem, which to my memory, this modern wave started in 2014 with Maleficent, but didn't fully blast off until Jon Favreau's Jungle Book remake 2 years later, which went on to make nearly $1 billion. And from there, Disney's eyes were lighting up with fat dollar signs. There had been successful live-action remakes in the past like Alice in Wonderland, which actually grossed over $1 billion too. If Alice in Wonderland struck the match, then Maleficent and Jungle Book brought the dynamite, acting as a new disgusting age for Disney that can be very unfavorably compared to the Disney Renaissance of the 90s. Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, The Little Mermaid, Disney is starting to run out of their classic animated films and is getting so pathetic and blatant with their greed, given the remake of Moana I mentioned before, a film that's less than 10 years old and has only just now gotten a mediocre sequel. At the very least, with all of the previous remakes, they could be considered legacy films that have had years of love, extra shows and sequels, or beloved classics that one could almost maybe argue that could benefit from a new interpretation or retelling of the story to introduce it to a new audience. I mean, The Lion King is completely timeless, but it's also an adaptation of Hamlet. You could very much take that original story and redo it with a brand new approach, also featuring anthropomorphic characters. I don't think a remake of The Lion King is an inherently bad idea. Maybe you could approach it with a live-action cast of real actors. The Lion King stage musical is an obvious inspiration for this approach, but a complete copy and paste shot-for-shot animated remake is dumb and stupid and bad. To give it any credit at all, I think if I had enough lobotomies, I might think there's at least barely more of a reason to remake it given its popularity and the desire to try and bring in a new audience compared to fucking Moana. Every child who liked Moana when it came out is still likely a child. Where is the nostalgia? You can't be nostalgic for a time in your life that you are still currently living in. Well, given what's happening with Moana 2, you can see how Disney would think to go full steam ahead with a remake. And you can absolutely bet that once they run out of their Disney animated films,
it's disappointing to not be doing as well as I think we should or deserve to be.
they're gonna turn to remaking Pixar's films. It's gonna happen at some point in the next 5 years. I'd be genuinely shocked if we weren't getting a live-action Toy Story by 2030. Creating a remake of a popular film or game is one thing already, and in many cases is an opportunity to try and cash in on a new audience by relying on a tried and true idea rather than taking a chance at something bold and new. But a live-action remake of an already existing animated property, no company commits that sin more frequently than Disney. Although DreamWorks is now taking their first step. Maybe I'm just ignorant or exaggerating, but I genuinely cannot think of a single example where a live-action remake of an already existing animated work improved on the original in any meaningful way, or offered something new or interesting to think about and enjoy. It's important to make the distinction between a live-action adaptation versus a live-action remake of an already existing and successful animated film. Using different mediums to create different adaptations and original works from a story is great. Pinocchio has the original 1940 Disney classic, the new stop-motion adaptation by Guillermo del Toro, which is excellent, or live-action adaptations of the original story, all of which are different and valid approaches to adapting Carlo Collodi's original novel. But then you have Disney's live-action remake of their own pre-existing animation, and it's ugly and bad and very bad, and if you like it or think it's actually an improvement on the original, I don't think you should be allowed to experience joy or peace. It comes across as an insult to the original work of art, and it feels so cynical. It's a decision that can't help but feel wholly motivated by greed, and this misguided idea that live action is somehow superior to animation, which already gets enough poor treatment from Hollywood. The industry hardly acknowledges animated films, alongside other common snuffs like horror films. Only 3 animated films have ever been nominated for Best Picture in the history of the Academy Awards, and this trend will continue until Hollywood stops treating animation as a genre and starts recognizing it as a medium for telling great stories. Is this a lukewarm take? Yeah. Despite some of the overwhelming sales and success of some of Disney's live-action films, I imagine many people are starting to feel fatigue, as evidenced by the recent underperformance of The Little Mermaid and the mixed critical reception of these films that started snowballing with The Lion King. But it seems like there's more remakes being made than ever before, and not just in film. Video game remakes have been skyrocketing, with a particular trend specifically towards those released during the 5th and 6th generation of consoles. Resident Evil 4, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Persona 3 Reload, Silent Hill 2, The Last of Us. There are great remakes in film that take an original source material and adapt it for a brand new take, like The Fly or Suspiria, that are so different and unique that they can be separated from the original source and judged entirely on their own merits. But it's a lot harder to find examples like these in many of the biggest mainstream game remakes. Video game remakes have been around for as long as video games have been made, but as I mentioned with film, there seems like there's more and more of them being developed with every passing year. It's actually appropriate to mention the Resident Evil 4 remake, since from my perspective, I feel like the Resident Evil 1 remake in 2002 is one of the first big mainstream game remakes that I can think of, releasing only 6 years after the original and setting the modern standard for how many popular games today approach their remakes. It iterates in many subtle but impressive ways, but most noticeably, the incredible new visuals and gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds and artwork still hold up today and are unbelievable when held to comparison with the original title. Despite the time between the two titles being less than The Last of Us and its remake, the progression of visual fidelity in games in the 90s versus now highlights how we are reaching a bit of a plateau regarding innovation in technology and visual prowess. We have other titles dating all the way back to the arcade era, regarding home console ports of classic arcade games and re-releases of more retro games. The first that comes to mind is Super Mario All-Stars, a compilation of remakes of the first 4 2D Mario games, although today there may be some debate as to whether All-Stars is a remake or more of a remaster. The word remake is harder to define with games, as it's more of a spectrum between what is considered a remaster versus a remake. To put it simply, in most cases, a remaster is a new coat of paint, whereas a remake is a brand new title typically built from the ground up. The Crash Bandicoot trilogy and Metroid Prime, to me, are very much remasters, since they are meant to act as close to the originals as possible, keeping the same physics, gameplay. I think a good way to define a remaster is if someone could play through the entirety of the original Metroid Prime blindfolded, and then have no trouble completing a remake, then that would fall under the remaster category. It would be the film equivalent of something like a 4K remaster, since the technical aspects of film don't age nearly as much as something like older games that may have low quality textures, lighting, or poor performance that may benefit from a fresh coat of paint. It's not necessarily an objective improvement, it still comes down to personal preferences, as some details do get lost in translation. But overall, they could be considered as an alternate history. What would these classic games have looked like if they were originally made today? I guess The Last of Us Part 1 would fall into this category since it functions as the exact same as the previously mentioned remasters, with the exception that Crash and Prime's visuals do change significantly, given the progress of technology since their original releases. Alright, I guess I can talk a little more about The Last of Us since I keep bringing this up. The Last of Us Part 1, which I've never played, so this is just my opinion given the reviews and marketing I've seen. Maybe my perspective would change if I played it myself, but I highly doubt that. Is a cash grab, capitalizing off the popularity of the franchise, which is no surprise given that it released just a year before the HBO show, and the use of the name Part 1 confirms that they wanted anyone unfamiliar with the franchise to start right here and ignore the perfectly playable original title, which also has a former remastered version, confusingly named The Last of Us Remastered, which I could see the argument for it being a remaster, but honestly it mostly just functions as an upscale port, whereas The Last of Us Part 1 is a remaster like Metroid Prime Remastered or Crash Bandicoot, except some people technically consider it a remake, which yeah, I guess that makes sense since it was technically remade from the ground up, but then it gets confusing since the Crash trilogy, I believe, was fully redeveloped from the ground up, but then you introduce The Last of Us 2 Remastered and hopefully I made my point clear regarding what a video game remaster is, so let's define this spectrum of video game remakes, starting with remakes that are very faithful to their originals and going further and further. You can consider Resident Evil 2002 close to the beginning of this spectrum as well. Unlike the other titles I'll talk about, I haven't played the original RE1, so if I'm incorrect about the remake's placement on the spectrum, please let me know. I could also see it being placed further beyond. Starting at the bottom, you have examples like Persona 3 Reload, which tries to stay as faithful to the original as possible while adding some new features and streamlining certain elements, but more or less playing very similarly. No significant change here. It's a turn-based RPG, and familiarity with the original will make this experience easy to approach. While the blindfold analogy would dictate this as a remake, given adjustments to how the dungeons are and different 3D environments and camera, it still emulates many of the feelings and moments of the original without trying to forge an identity of its own. Further down the remake spectrum, we get something like Resident Evil 4 Remake. It iterates on the gameplay of the original to modernize it, with more fluid movement and less clunky mechanics like having to access the pause menu to switch your weapons. The story told is mostly the same, but there are subtle changes to characterization whilst retaining some of the original personalities. Some moments of the story have been removed, and some have been added in. While any fan of Resident Evil 4 will be able to jump in and recognize the set pieces, weapons, enemies, there are enough new elements and surprises to keep it engaging. The remake's originality and charm shines the more you delve into it. And then at the very top, we have titles like Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, which reinvents nearly every aspect of the original game to create a brand new experience. The gameplay has been reworked, acting is an entirely different genre for the most part. The story's been expanded on to the point where it features brand new characters and story beats. While it maintains a connection with the original and the biggest narrative highlights, Final Fantasy VII Remake doesn't want to provide a new take on the original Final Fantasy VII for a brand new audience. It seeks to be a continuation of Final Fantasy VII, almost acting like a sequel rather than an alternate take. FF7 Remake's story is very unique in this regard, and you won't find many other video game remakes that are as different from their original counterparts as this one. If you want another example that doesn't act like a pseudo-sequel, then the only other remake that I can think of that is considered so different from the original is Super Mario 64 DS. I don't think you'll find many remakes at all that are like these two. Unlike how one could argue for titles like Persona 3 and Resident Evil 4, the FF7 remake isn't looking to make new fans. It's very much meant for old ones. If you'd like to know more, then you can check out my review of FF7 Rebirth, where I delve much more into the concepts of the remake and all of its strengths and shortcomings. I've played all three of these remakes and their original counterparts too, and in that, I have to say, they're fun. If you have any interest in them, I could recommend all three of them. I've been having a blast streaming Resident Evil 4 Remake. I think that... Wait, why didn't I use that? I'm panicking. I think FF7 Rebirth is worth checking out if you've played the original, despite some of my issues with it. And in the case of Persona 3 Reload, given how similar it is to the original, I actually think you don't even have to play the original if you play the remake. Both are very valid interpretations of Persona 3, and it comes down to your personal taste. But I enjoyed Reload more, because it improves on some clunky mechanics and gameplay shortcomings from Persona 3, which I also talk about with my original review. Remakes for games can be fun and interesting takes, but by and large, unless it's a wholly original and completely alternate take like FF7 Remake, then it feels like we're just going in circles now. Persona 3 Reload, for as much as I like it more than the original for its improvements, is basically the same game. The extra production value with more voiced dialogue and gameplay improvements is great, but most of the great elements for Persona 3 were already there to begin with. Persona 3 Reload just wraps everything up into a more complete package that the original couldn't quite do for me. Resident Evil 4 Remake is very polished and addicting, but all of its elements that make it so delightful, like the gunplay, combat, progression, all of that could fit right in for a hypothetical Resident Evil 9. The aspects that make Resident Evil 4 unique, Like the story, Leon, and the setting, all of them are very important to the game's identity, but strip all that away and you'd still be left with an incredible foundation for a future Resident Evil. FF7 Rebirth is good, and as I said, I think it is the most unique of the remakes mentioned, and I would like future remakes in this industry to take notes from Remake and Rebirth's approach. But all that being said, the very best things about it, the production value, combat, and music, all of that would have worked well for an original spin-off or Final Fantasy XVII, very much like Resident Evil 4 Remake. I think some of the weakest aspects to Remake and Rebirth revolve around padding in the pacing and some clunky, confusing storytelling. In fact, despite enjoying FF7 Rebirth more than Final Fantasy XVI, I respect 16 for the brand new direction it takes with the action combat and story's tone, and if I had to choose between playing an original Final Fantasy XVII that continues the new direction of 16, or the third entry in the FF7 Remake trilogy, I would choose the original new experience over a continuation of the remake. But regarding originality, the issue isn't really so black and white for many game remakes. Some of the greater and more memorable film remakes can get away with being creatively bold and different since they tend to be led by entirely different creative leads with little connection to the original artists. But many video game remakes feel creatively hampered by the restrictions they have to follow. If they try to veer off to be too bold or new, then they may alienate the original fans, which would be problematic for sales and profit. But if they play it too safe, then they risk fading into obscurity or coming across as blatant cash grabs. Granted, this dilemma affects films as well. It's not like a remake of something like Star Wars wouldn't be under extreme scrutiny to satisfy fans, while also trying to ignore the issues of something like the sequel films and aim for more originality. At least any remake would be more original than The Last of Us Part 1. Honestly, is it an exaggeration to say that The Last of Us Part 1 is the Lion King 2019 of video games? Its very existence genuinely annoys me. Regardless of what direction you look at the issue from, we can all agree that we have enough remakes, probably until the end of time. And if you're starting to feel fatigued from the overwhelming majority of them, the only way you can make any meaningful stance or start change is to vote with your wallets. If you want more original stories, ideas, and art, you have to seek out those original ideas. And if you like it, recommend it to your friends. For indie games and films, it goes a long way. Resident Evil 4, Persona 3 Reload, FF7 Rebirth are all good remakes that I could recommend, and I don't regret my time with them. But I also try to maintain a healthy balance towards new experiences, and I recommend you do the same. Not only is it a healthy way to approach art and entertainment, but actually helps build newfound appreciation towards the remakes as well. As the more unique experiences I seek out for comparison, the more I circle back to the great elements that make the remakes good. Expand your bubble. The more you do, the easier it is to enjoy things. Except The Lion King 2019. This is the biggest exception to the rule. It is a genuine insult to art itself, and all other live-action copy and paste remakes of beloved animated films can burn in hell where they belong.
Anyways, I should be getting back to hell now.